A couple of upcoming events. I think they'll be on your screen here. Next week, the Associate Board is having an event, which is actually a social event as well as a recipe exchange for those of you who maybe have some holiday recipes ready. Next Wednesday, November 11th, 5:30 to 6:30, right after work. And it will probably be a fun time, and there'll be a lot to talk about. And we're also looking for young professionals to join in with the Associate Board, helping with planning and such. So if you are a young professional or you have someone on your team you think would be interested, please recommend that they join this event and reach out. It's at chicagobusinessmarketing.net. After that, in December 11th at noon, is our next event like this one. Today we'll talk about an approach to planning and resource management, which is sort of the science side of marketing. But next month we'll build on that by reflecting more on the art side of marketing. In particular, how do we create experiences for customers? How do we engage and encourage connection? And it should be particularly interesting because a lot has changed given the pandemic, but we'll also talk about how technology is advancing to help us create better experiences. And Victoria Morrissey, who's the Global Marketing and Brand Director for Caterpillar, will address how we'll reclaim and reinvent our humanity and ensure our brands are more powerful than ever in a post-COVID world. Before the introductions today, I'd like to talk about a couple of logistics. Our recommendations for you all on the call are to look at your top right window and click on speaker view. It'll give you a better experience, as obviously will enlarge the person who's on microphone. We have muted everyone's microphones to start. But however, we can't control your cameras. So remember, you could be on camera at any time, viewed by others. And there's been lots of stories in the press about how that's come back to bite people. So turn off your camera if you don't want to be seen. If you have any technical challenges, reach out to Maggie Orchard, who's our event producer. But we will have the chat function going, and Tim may talk a little bit about that as he kicks us off. So you'll be able to submit questions and participate as we get towards the end. But as far as today's event, it's our goal to help us all be high performance marketers. I think we all have an opportunity to rethink how we plan for better marketing, and in particular, how we more effectively drive growth. We all know the pandemic has forced us to do a lot of things differently, but we have an opportunity to focus on what really matters in driving growth, and not enough attention's paid to that in my experience. Tim Calkins, Kellogg professor of marketing strategy and branding and biomedical marketing, is an expert on this. In fact, he wrote a great book called Breakthrough Marketing Plans that now it's probably 15 years old or so. It still as relevant as ever. I've recommended it to many of our clients at Aspire Up here. Tim is actually a friend and a board member here at Aspire Up. But I want to recommend that book to all of you. I think you'll find there's some very practical frameworks, and Tim will get into some of that as he tees us up. Also joining us are two of my CMO friends who can speak to how they've applied some principles of planning in a post-COVID world. Casey Foss, who's CMO at West Monroe Partners, a Chicago-based consulting firm with several thousand consultants. She's been there about 13 years and CMO for the most recent period. She's been driving growth. They've been growing double digits. She's rebranded West Monroe Partners, entered new markets, a lot of change making as CMO. And then also joining us is Jeff Schmitz, who's CMO at Zebra Technologies. And Jeff came into this role, I don't know, four and a half years ago, I think you told me, Jeff. And he's reinvented marketing and brought marketing into sort of the company's overall growth planning and playing a much more strategic role. And he's also hired a team of high-performing marketers, and Zebra's success in the market and stock price has followed. So having great marketers, we all know, makes a big difference. Both Casey and Jeff have recently been cited by Crain's as two of Chicago's most notable marketers. So we're happy to have them join us. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Tim Calkins, who will lead us on an exciting journey.
All right, Roland, thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. I think this will be great fun. I am really looking forward to the topic and especially having Casey and Jeff with us. And I think this is going to be interesting for us to dive into. Our goal today is really very simple. What we want to do today is talk about how do you create a great marketing plan when the world is in just total and complete disarray. And the thing that's interesting for marketers right now is that marketers are sort of in the same boat all over the world. There is so much uncertainty. There is so much unknown that there's this question about how do you move forward and how do you plan and how do you take a business forward in an environment like that. So that's our topic for the day, and we're going to dive into it. We're going to spend some time on it. And the way this is going to work is we're going to take this session, and we've only got like 5 hours for this. So no, we've only got an hour, so we got to move. So number one, I want to talk a little bit about the challenge and just introduce why I think it is a particular challenge for marketers right now. And this environment is a really difficult one for planning. Then I've got 4 pieces of advice as you think about developing your plans this year as we look to 2021, 4 thoughts. And then we're going to turn it over, though, to Casey and Jeff to get their assessment of the situation, the world we're in right now, and how they're thinking about approaching planning as well. And then we'll have time for questions. And I'll have some questions for Jeff and Casey, but then we'll open it up for the group and we'll get your questions answered along the way as we go. A couple notes on logistics. You're probably all very familiar with Zoom. So it is, as Roland said, I think you're all muted, which is great. I actually would encourage you to keep your camera on. I know nothing exciting happens at my house or in my office. So it's more fun to see everybody, quite honestly. So if you can turn your camera on, that's more fun for everyone. When the time comes for questions, we have that hand raise function, and I'll tell you about that when we get there. Also, the chat function, though, is going and active, and that's all good. You can feel free to post things in chat. Just remember, though, anything you put in chat is sort of publicly available for the world. And it's funny. You wouldn't think you would have to remind people of that, but anyway. I teach a lot of MBA students, and sometimes, you got to remind them. Anyway, let's get to it. Let's talk about what's going on. So the challenge in the world where you think about creating marketing plans, and the reality is that creating marketing plans is always really hard. It's always hard. I think it's like the most difficult thing that often we're faced with as marketers. And it's hard for a very simple reason, which is it always involves making choices. And people hate making choices. It's so easy to think about all the different things we can do and all the different platforms that are available to us and all the new technologies we can use. And that's fun. And we love doing that. When it comes time to putting together a great marketing plan, though, that's where we have to start making the tough choices. What are we doing? What are we not doing? What are the priorities? What are not the priorities, right? We have to decide what we're going to do. And much more difficult what we aren't going to do. And I think this year is just a really challenging year for planning for a bunch of reasons. The first reason is that, you don't need me to tell you this, but the world is going through a little bit of a tumultuous period. Businesses are just disrupted in incredible ways. It's astonishing what we're seeing out there. I mean, you look at on the left there, hotel capacity, really all over the world, occupancy rates. People are not traveling at all like they used to. Restaurants have gotten just demolished. Airlines have gotten demolished. Cruise lines have the disruption is extraordinary. It's not all to the downside, of course. For some businesses, this has been a lot of disruption to the positive side, which in a way is better because demand is surging, but it creates its own separate collection of problems. It doesn't matter whether you're feeling good about the trends in your business or whether you're not. What's true pretty much across the board is that all the trends that we're used to working with are no longer holding. They're no longer existing. And everything's been thrown off kilter, which makes it really hard when you think about planning. The other problem, quite honestly, is that it is not at all clear how long this is going on. If we knew when this was going to end, if we had a good level of certainty about, we'll be back to normal in February or in May or in August or never. I mean, if we knew that, it would be a lot easier to plan for it. The problem is we really don't know how long this is going to continue on. In the spring, there was, you remember there in the spring, there was this theory that, after a couple of weeks of locking down, we're going to be good to go by Easter. Everything was supposed to be fine. And then people said, you know what, it's really the summer is going to knock this thing down. But of course, that was the reverse. The summer started flaring up again. And now some people were like, we'll be well past it now. But no, of course, now we're hitting the highs. So the uncertainty of that when you approach planning, I think is pretty profound because we don't know how long it's going to last. But the other piece is that we're seeing lots of new things in the world right now. And the challenge is it's very hard to anticipate what will life look like after we get through all of this, right? So if we knew, for example, that this was all going to end and by fall of next year, we'd be back pretty much to the way things were. Well, that would be easier for developing our plans. You could plan around that. You could figure out how do you work your budget, how do you work your tools, all of that. The problem is that even if things go back to sort of normal, the question we don't know is how much will normal in the new world look like normal in the old world? For example, Zoom, right? Here we all are today on Zoom. And the question you got to ask yourself, okay, well, whenever this is done, and I haven't a clue when that will be, but in 5 years, 10 years, right? Is Zoom still going to be part of our life? Is that behavior going to stick? I suspect so. But we'll see. Working from home, will we be, now more and more, we're all working from home every day. I'm actually today at a class, so I'm up here at Kellogg today, but very often I'm at home in the basement with the dogs, just like everyone these days. But how long is that going to last? And will that remain with us? And some people say, that's the end of offices as we know them. Offices are now gone forever. Other people say, no, I'm getting back in there. Things like baking. We've been baking at our house. Will we still be baking after this is all done? I don't know. Walking, pick your behavior. We're all doing different things. We're all trying different things. Our customers are doing different things. The thing we don't really know is how much of all that is going to stick. So going into planning, then you're like, well, darn, everything's disrupted. So I've got no trend lines to work with. I don't know when it's going back to normal. I don't even know what the new normal will look like. I guess that means, I should just give up on the whole thing because it's just hopeless. I mean, what are you going to do? Yeah. The only problem is, though, the one thing I think you can't do is just to give up on it. The problem is if you give up on plans and if you give up on establishing a direction for your business, nothing good happens. One of the things that's true is if you look at organizations and they don't have a plan, everything they do becomes so tactical, so executional. There's nothing holding it together. If your default solution is let's just skip the planning process this year, that's not going to get you to a great solution. So what could you do? Let me give you four sort of pieces of advice as we go into planning this year. So the first piece of advice that I would really be thinking about is really simplify and accelerate the planning process. Now, I've studied marketing plans at lots of companies and companies all over the world, and I talk to companies about this a lot. And what is amazing to me is that companies today still, in many cases, they spend so much time developing these marketing plans. And you go to a company, I was just at one recently, and they were laying out the planning process. And, we identify the key questions in March, and then we answer the key questions in May. And then in June, we synthesize all of that into our strategic must-dos. And then in August, it's like the whole year is in this environment. An extended process like that that's just not going to work. The reason is because you just can't spend that long developing the plan, because by the time you get to the end of the plan, the world has all changed and it's just not gonna work for you. And that's really the challenge. Someone was saying, somebody at a candy company, and they were saying, Halloween this year was so hard because they were developing the plans for Halloween way in advance, like in March, right in the middle of the pandemic. And then they got to Halloween and they're like, how do you formulate that? Because the world's changing. So if you're at a company and you've got this long established, year-long plan, I think now is the time to really get rid of that because it's just not going to work very well. I think the goal is to create a feasible plan quickly based on what we know. And then you want to be very ready to change it as we learn more, as things adjust. I think a little bit now, marketers, it's a little bit like watching that election map. You sit there and like everything's like red, and then a little bit it turns blue. But as the world changes and as we learn more, we've got to constantly be updating the plan and making sense of it. The only way this works, though, is that if you base your planning process around really simple templates that are easy to work with and easy to update, right? It means you have to throw out the long, complicated process. That doesn't work anymore. You've got to go to a simple template. In my book, one of the things I always teach is this just sort of a simple template. Here's our goals, here's our initiatives. What are the 2 or 3 big priorities for us? What are the tactics, right, associated with each one of those initiatives? And a simple framework like this, I find really useful at a time like this, because you can develop a plan. It doesn't take you forever to do it. You can update it, you can revise it, you can keep it up to date. It's a flexible document and you can work with it. So the first thing, keep it simple, keep it easy to work with. The second thing that I think is really important right now, more than ever, is to embrace the cross-functional team. Now, this is always part of creating a good marketing plan. You want to make sure the cross-functional team is part of it, and you want to make sure your operations group is part of it, and the sales team. That's almost a given. In this world, though, it takes on particular urgency. And one of the things I think you really have to be thinking about right now is what's happening across the entire organization, because in a lot of places we're seeing huge disruptions, which means that even the plans we create can easily lose the connection to the logistics of the business. I just did a session this week with the CMO at SC Johnson, and they were saying they're running into a big problem right now in the supply chain. And apparently one of the big problems at SCJ are the little squirter nozzles. The little squirter nozzles, right? Apparently, finding a squirter nozzle right now is really hard. There's so much demand for those things. There's so much capacity constraint on it that they're like, darn, what do we do with that? And if you didn't have a link to the supply chain and you weren't really cued into it, you wouldn't be aware of that as you formulate the plan. So the second, I think, big thing this year, more maybe than ever, is to make sure the cross-functional team is involved also with our customers, right? To really understand what our customers are seeing is so important at the moment. You need the sales organization reporting back what are customers running into, what are they encountering. For example, a lot of retailers, everybody, of course, all the retailers, as you know, they're all shifting to delivery and to Instacart and all these different ways of delivering things. The interesting thing is when you really ponder on what does that mean for companies who sell through those providers. And the answer is it means that you need a totally new approach to thinking about that business. What's the right pack size? What's the right packaging? What's the right assortment? All of this stuff is different ever as our customers change. So the cross-functional perspective becomes just wildly important in this environment. Look for opportunities. So it's very easy this year to say, this is such a mess and terrible situation. The reality is, I think, though, there are enormous opportunities and there are a lot of things that are positives in this environment that can help us as we create marketing plans. A couple of things to think about. Number one, the thing we're seeing now is all of this disruption is accelerating innovation. It's accelerating change. So, as you go into the planning process, one of the things I'd be thinking about is what are the things that I've been wanting to change for years, and I never could get that change to happen. And now is the time. And I think there's lots of companies are seeing these things. If you take advantage of them, you can really make profound changes. Yeah, in education here at Northwestern, now I teach all the time. I'm teaching on Zoom, all the time. And I think for many years, people have said, that's going to happen. We're going, remote learning is the thing no, but it never did until now it is. And now it's part of our world. So from a change perspective, I think that's a big thing to think about. It also is a big opportunity for companies if you can keep focused and do some great marketing. In an environment like this, many companies, you see them, they cut back on marketing, they sort of give up. And they say, you know what, we're just not going to do anything given the uncertainty. That gives a huge opportunity for companies that continue to market, continue to make smart decisions, continue to invest in new things. It's a great opportunity to pick up market share. It is also, and I think this one is a huge one, it is a wonderful time to reset your financial expectations. Setting the financial expectations, I think, is a really important part of the planning process because, your plan's got to connect with the numbers. In many companies, what's happened is that the businesses have gotten locked into a set of financial expectations. And every year you end up chasing these numbers, and the numbers go up by 7% a year. And heaven forbid they would ever, go down a little bit. Right. And as a result, it locked a lot of companies into doing a level of promotions that maybe they weren't comfortable with, that having a level of incentives for customers that maybe they weren't comfortable with. This though is different. You know what? 2020, and I think 2021 for basically every company will go down in history with an asterisk by the numbers. So if you think about it, if there's anything that you've wanted to do that would require a financial reset of your business, I was talking to somebody and their company had gotten totally hooked on discounting and this level of discounting, and it was escalating year. And now this year they said, you know what? It's all gone. It's all gone because now we can reset it. Look for those opportunities. It's like baseball, same thing. The season's going to go down with a lot of asterisks around the records. And yeah, it was a good season, but it was the COVID season. Same thing for businesses. That's a huge opportunity when you look at it. And then the fourth piece of advice is really to embrace testing and learning. The reality is right now, we don't know what is going on in many cases. We don't know what works in this new environment. We don't know what's going to stick. We just don't know. The one thing that we do know, though, is that figuring it out becomes really important. So as you go into a planning process this year, I would have a series of tests lined up. And things you're trying, things you're testing. We're going to go try this. We're going to try this. We're going to do 5 different tests next year. Right? We will learn what's working, because when we get through this, we're going to be better for it because we would have learned from some of these things. Right? And I think that can help a lot. Right. All right. So there's sort of 4 things. 1, simplify the process, involve the cross-functional team, find the opportunities that are out there, and really embrace testing and learning. Okay. All right. Let's shift gears though. I want to shift it over now to 2 folks who are in the trenches navigating through all of this. And I want to turn it over to Casey and Jeff. And I want to start off here. And maybe you can give us a little bit of your background, what you've been seeing, and what you see as you look to the future on all of this. So why don't we go over to, hey, Casey, why don't we go to you? Do you want to start us off there?
Sounds great. Thanks, Tim. And thanks to the ANA for having me here today and including me. As Roland mentioned at the top of this, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at West Monroe, which is a business and technology consulting firm based in Chicago, but with offices across the country. And so as I just starting with me, right, my past has kind of touched many different facets of marketing. I started my career in public relations and then made the jump to database segmentation and customer contact strategy. So very data heavy before I joined West Monroe. And when I joined West Monroe, we were about 200 people. There were 5 marketers. We all did the same thing, right? We packaged up capabilities, we created offerings, we put them on the website and a campaign in the market. And as Roland had mentioned, as a firm that grows as quickly as ours, that evolution kind of took off, right? In order to grow at a compound annual growth rate similar to what we've seen in the past 5 years, which was 27%, we had to position ourselves differently in the organization. To keep up with the evolution of the firm. And so similarly, with the firm's growth, the marketing function grew, right? We went from 5 to 25. We went from being order takers to strategic partners that really helped drive revenue back into the organization. And that came from this insane focus on our customers, right? And the market at large, and keeping an agenda that was the firm's agenda. There wasn't a separate marketing program. To your point on marketing planning, our annual planning process is that process you described, right, Tim? And now it's gotten condensed. And part of that is because we all proved, everybody at this call and companies all across the country, that in 2 weeks you can replan, right? Because in March, we all had to kind of shut down and do that. But so our plan really is the firm's plan, our success metrics, the firm's success metrics. And that's all really rooted in what our clients want and need. And I just started to go here, but being obsessed with the market and client data really came in handy in March of this year. I'm assuming everybody on this call, similarly to me, right? We are ending the year with completely different marketing plans, whether they're different strategies, different budgets. We all started from scratch on March 13th. If not sooner, right? For West Monroe, specifically, when shelter-in-place orders were instituted in March, our buyers within our core industries had their business models turned upside down. We serve healthcare providers. They could no longer see patients in their offices. Banks had to figure out how to execute PPP loans. utilities, which had never worked from home, had digital workplaces almost overnight. And so the messages we wanted to put in the market, nobody cared about at that point, right? And the content that we had planned for months before were kind of out the window, and we had to really focus on what their immediate pain points were today. And so to do that, our team, and I'll share a little bit about kind of what we learned this year and then how that parlays into next year. To accomplish that, our team really switched to this Scrum-like process within our own team, where we met frequently. We would talk about the trends. We would figure out who we needed on that cross-functional team to get a campaign up and running, to get an offering in the market, whether that was marketing or our technology practice or whomever across the firm. And we really took this all hands approach to make sure that the content and the marketing offerings and everything tied together. So we weren't wasting any time or money. You talk about changing on a dime. Within 4 days, we removed everything we had in the market. And within 4 weeks, we put in almost 20 new offerings and messages. So that's kind of what I'm getting at when I say in 2 weeks, we all learned how to blow up what we had and start over. But beyond kind of the messaging component, there was the tactic piece, right? That went away. We are huge in event marketing. That is how we build relationships with clients from a professional services perspective. And there's obviously none of those, right? And so how do you shift that external in-person event strategy to a virtual strategy? And then the last thing that is probably more unique to our organization is we were set to launch a brand at the beginning of April of this year. And we had spent the year prior figuring out the perfect message, the right word, what the ad would look like, where it should be placed. And 2 weeks pre-launch, we said, now is clearly not the right time. And how do you, and we had to rethink, how do you launch a brand in a pandemic, right? Where people don't want to hear about you, but how you help them. And so we redid in 6 weeks kind of what that brand launch plan looks like, because we knew we were sitting on better messaging and more relevant topics and a better way of serving clients. We just had to find a less self-focused way to kind of get that into the market. And so where do we go from here, right? We are definitely not anticipating that anything will be back to normal in January. I think, Tim, you mentioned, first it was summer, then it was going to be 2021. Now it's Q4 of 2021. Like, it just keeps getting pushed out. And so without knowing where the future goes, we're really leveraging 3 key takeaways from this year as we focus on where we're going to go to 2021. And the first one is focus. And I'll start with that one because it's easy, right? It's not new. Anybody who's been in marketing knows that we always have to make choices. It's what to do, and the harder decision, Tim, to your point, is what not to do. And when I talk about focus, I talk a lot about our total addressable market, right? We work in a finite number of industries. We know the size that our clients typically are, where we have good relationships, where we're able to drive substantial value into their organizations. And we also know that we compete within that client base among the big 4 consulting firms. And so I have to be very specific with my dollars so that I can overcome among my target buyers I've heard of this big 4 firm, I haven't heard of West Monroe. And so we are vigilant about making sure that every dollar we spent goes only to those people. And that's remaining really focused. And not only ensuring that they see this stuff, but the content is taking buyers through the journey and meeting them where they are on that journey, and ultimately showing them how we can drive value. And so we invested this year in an ABM platform called 6 Sense that I'm sure several people on the phone are familiar with. And we chose that one, and I share it because it helps us remain focused. They help us create our ideal client profile. They help us only target people in our total addressable market. And what's more important is they help us predict who's showing signs of buying soon, right? So we can continue to focus down that list of buyers and see more engagement with those people that we spend time with most frequently. So how does that really impact the planning process for this year? Well, we've shifted our team to be more responsive, and we went from having siloed marketing functions, so a local marketing function and a practice-specific marketing function, to having these pods that really help focus on top of funnel, middle funnel, bottom funnel and pair 3 or 4 marketers together to effectively go after a specific segment. So that's kind of one big change we've made as we shift into that increase in focus. The second thing for us as we look to 2021 is relationship building is going to continue to look differently, right? As I mentioned, in professional services, relationships are key to how we drive revenue. To the tune of 55% of our revenue comes from our most mature client relationships. And we also know that those relationships buy more regularly, spend more in dollar amounts, have shorter sales cycles. So how do we continue to build relationships with them when trade shows, sponsored events, client entertainment are kind of gone? And so as we've went through this year, we've spent a lot of time on meeting clients where they are. And so that could be heavier investments on digital experiences for those clients, having smaller, obviously properly socially distanced protocols for in-person client entertainment. We're not taking them to, the Masters anymore, but how do you entertain them in a more meaningful way? Gifting. But the other kind of thing that's similar but slightly different is this partnership. We've invested a lot more in these partnerships to meet clients where they already are to get information, right? Everybody, because they're stuck at home and not going to trade shows, has a different need to do research to make the right business decision, and making sure that we're partnering with those organizations will be key for the future. And the last one is agility wins. And I mean, your annual planning process really rang true with me, Tim, that you were talking through. I think we've shown that we can build teams to be nimble and pivot as market conditions change. And if there is one thing that I think every marketer needs to hold on to tight in 2021 is the ability to do that. We learned really 3 things to be true, right? Buyers' needs can change on a dime, and we have to remain focused on what they care about first and foremost. Customers now have increasingly open expectations, right? They want to be part of the process. They're okay with something that's 80% of the way there, as long as they can get it and iterate on it with you. And the third thing in there that we learned this year is that authenticity really matters. And to be authentic, you need to keep in mind that human-to-human communication, and it needs to feel genuine. And as things change on a dime, you need to change on that dime as well. And so from a planning perspective, this year we'll likely build a plan that increases investments as we hit milestones. When uncertainty goes down, when revenue goes up, maybe we hit another milestone, we add something to the mix. We'll revisit themes and tactics quarterly instead of annually. And we'll plan for these big rocks or anchor tenets of like what we really want to do and get in front of our clients. And then everything that supports those will be assessed quarterly. Right. And so to me, it's really like, do you remaining focused, purposeful on relationships and agile is the new norm, right? That's kind of where our heads are at.
Wonderful. Thank you, Casey. That's awesome. That is great stuff. Hey, let me go over to Jeff. Hey, Jeff, give us your perspective, what you're seeing going forward. So let's go.
I'll follow the great job, Casey. That was awesome. I'll try to follow the same format that Casey did. And I'll start with maybe a little bit of background for people who don't know me or Zebra. So my career actually started in engineering, and I'll just say that it's quite a transformation from going from engineering to somebody who was a general manager and marketing was part of the function, now to a full-time CMO role, which I've had over the last 4.5 years. So that's been my own journey, and that's probably a little bit different story. The journey of the company is more important, and the evolution of marketing along the way, both looking backwards and forwards, probably more interesting. The history of Zebra, that's relevant to this discussion, is Zebra was a local Chicago business, about $1 billion of revenue, doing specialty printing, thinking barcode printing. Every package that shows up on your door with a barcode, or in your retail environment, you see barcodes all on the shelves. Those printers were used for those kinds of barcode applications. And that $1 billion company merged in 2014-15 with a $2.5 billion piece of Motorola. Rarely do you see billion-dollar companies buying $2.5 billion companies and finding a way to orchestrate that successfully. It also meant bringing together different marketing teams, rebranding, which we did in 2018, and then really rethinking, and that kind of goes into the first part of the strategy, rethinking what marketing needed to be for this new entity. And brand was clearly a piece, but there were other pieces of the transformation that were necessary, and they were steeped in Yes, we are a support organization. Yes, we're here to support the products, the product launches, and the sales teams. No question about that. But we also saw the evolution of support moving towards being a source of revenue, whether that means starting to sell product in e-commerce marketplaces and having the entire customer journey go from very sales focused to at least one where there may be salespeople involved in the back end, or in some cases, fulfillment all the way through digital. It also meant really putting our arms around analytics. And those were some of the key tenets of where we've been taking marketing. Now, COVID hits. Holy smokes, what happens now? Well, first of all, let me say that, and I admit it openly, I think I've been eating poorly for 6 months, so I got that going for me. But the second thing that happened was more business related is our employees started having this problem of not being able to separate work from their personal lives. So Zoom is a wonderful thing, but it blurs the lines, and a lot of pressure is put on marketing people because we were asked to be agile really quickly. And I think we have to be really conscious of what's happening to our employees. Customers were next. As you said, Tim, and we found it the same way. For us, it's feast or famine. Our biggest vertical is retail, and the large retailers are investing like crazy in technology. And why? Because their fulfillment options are changing. As you said, delivery, picking in a store for buy online, pick up in store, all requires our technology, not just the printing component, but mobile computers where some people can pick in store and such. We also serve the healthcare community. And so if you're trying to track and trace from the time of a pop-up COVID-19 testing, you need to label every specimen and track it through the entire process. These were the famine. And of course we had, the feast. We also had the famine. We certainly serve retail and fashion, and that just slowed down. And SMB, small and medium business, slowed down. So we saw that happen. Our response to this was quick. And much like Casey, we immediately jumped into a more agile approach. We launched a global campaign that was really focused on being, as Casey said, authentic from a brand perspective. How do we talk to our customers on the front line of business, whether they're taking a sample in a pop-up specimen collection area, or if they're picking from a store, how do we help them, not try to sell them, but authentically try to help them? How do they clean the device they share with other people? This became really important. And how do we celebrate those frontline employees? So we quickly moved to what we called an empowering heroes, the frontline employees, which we've been talking about in our brand for now a couple of years. And we really focused on them and focused on how can we help them? How do we get them the latest cleaning information? How do they keep those devices clean? How do they keep safe? And how do we celebrate them? And by the way, we moved very quickly. We had our most successful global campaign ever in our history. And we launched it all in about a month. We also turned it off about a month later because everybody jumped in on this bandwagon. And I think it was becoming a little non-authentic. I think it almost became a joke of people, not that maybe an overstatement, but it became too ubiquitous, I would say. So that was one thing that we did right away, and I think that was helpful. Another thing happened as well, and that's virtual events. I think Casey touched on that as well. We probably spent a good 15% of our program budget on events, and they all went away. We quickly pivoted to virtual events. We've touched tens of thousands of partners and customers by that switch, and it's been really effective for us. And I won't spend more time on that because I know that's touched on. The other thing I would say that, and I want to touch on this, Tim, because you mentioned it and it came to mind. I would say that you're right. Our planning is, we've gotten better at planning, and at some point it's become maybe a little more complex than it should. So I think that's really good. But another thing happened in COVID, and that is budgets got tight. And they got really tight really fast. And I always joke around, and a great relationship with our CFO, there's nothing that looks more appetizing to a CFO than a group with a giant program budget, right? Because nobody gets hurt. And so, but of course, that's not necessarily the case. So budgets got tight and we had to move quickly. Moreover, to the planning point, I agree with you. You can't put planning away. And one thing that I found marketing teams struggle with is it's easy to say, strategy is all about saying no, but we love saying yes. We love it. We love it to the point where we can't spend time with our families anymore, and we don't have any more budget anymore, but we just keep plugging away and we don't say no. And the truth of the matter is analytics and planning are critical, if only for one thing, And that is to have the rich discussions with our stakeholders that are required. Hey, you want to launch all these products? I don't have what you need to launch all those. Let's make choices. And you've got to have enough data in your plan to make those choices. Hey, sales, I know you want to run an ABM with every product line and every vertical and every customer base. Let's talk about what really moves the needle. And you have to have enough data in your plan so you can keep it, find the balance. How do you keep it simple? I agree with you, Tim, but how do you have enough data to have a richer discussion where it's not just no or yes, but I don't know how to do it. And I think that's a key learning. And I'll add a couple more points here. Agility is great, but agility isn't for everything. What we found is it's easy to get spun up on, look how great it was. We can do everything in an agile way. You just got to be careful. Agility works for some things. It doesn't work for everything. And if it becomes a method to not saying no to things, then you've really gone back to really disadvantaging your employees who are already stressed. And I can't stress that enough. So to cut it short on going forward, we will come back and focus on those key things, tenets for us. And that means analytics, digital, and much like we see our customers putting the accelerator on digital, whether that's e-commerce or whether that's in-store shopping and buy line pickup store, which is a digital movement, we're seeing a move to digital. We need to get back to the basics of the fundamental changes we're making, and we need to have deep, rich discussions with our stakeholders so we make the right bets next year as a team. And I think those are probably the key learnings I'll leave you with. It.
All right, very nice. Thank you, Jeff. That's awesome. Yeah, the whole feast or famine thing. I bet you are totally seeing that across your customers. Incredible. Now, why don't we? I'm sensitive to our time, so I want to make sure if you folks have questions, I want to make sure we get to those. I've got lots of questions for these folks, but if you do have a question, you can do the little blue hand raise thing. If you go under participants and click on that, you should be able to see a little blue hand. That's a good way we can call on you. Then you'll pop up to the top of the list here. Or if you got a question, you can put it in the chat. Let me go to one question, I guess, for both of you, Casey and Jeff. So in-person events, right? A huge deal. They all go away. When do you think, as you approach planning, when do you think about in-person events coming back? I mean, have you given up on them forever? Do you think we'll always be or do you say, no, our planning is by June, we'll be back visiting customers more in person? How do you think about that, Casey? Let's go to you first.
I wish I knew, to be honest. I wish that is the hard part. I can say from a planning perspective, we are not planning to be in market at events with clients until at least the second half of next year. And then I think there's kind of the stepped approach, right? I think maybe in the summer when people can be outside and socially distanced, there's smaller client gatherings or smaller events. I think and I'm sure I'm not in the minority, but I'm sure there are different opinions on this. I think the Dreamforce events of the world are gone for years. I don't see hundreds of thousands of people congregating anywhere. And so as we think about larger trade shows, those we don't really have in the plan for next year.
And they're just going to be gone for a long time. Hey, Jeff, what are you thinking? Do you think this in-person things and as you go into planning, how do you even think about that?
Yeah, I mean, twofold. One is I think virtual is great, but one thing we've learned about virtual, and I've read this and seen this, is people pay a lot of attention for 5 or 10 minutes. We probably have that criteria here, right? And after 15 minutes, I think go get some chips or something. Well, that's what I do. But I think there's a certain amount of tune out that happens very early that's harder to happen in live. So I don't think virtual is a substitute for live interactions or trade shows. That being said, I'm with Casey. I don't think we're going to see any large trade shows in the first half of next year. Our large trade shows around manufacturing and retail and healthcare have generally all moved to they all stacked up into the second half of next year. They all moved their giant shows. I don't know if they'll happen or not, but from a planning perspective, we're planning for that surge in the second half. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's definitely not happened in the first half.
Got it. Yeah, interesting. Hey, Alice has got an interesting question. Alice, can you unmute yourself and ask your question? I see her there. Oh, she's connecting to it. Let's see if that works. Give me a second here, Alice. Maybe working, maybe not. Maybe not. I can capture the gist of it from the chat. I think. Alice, are you in? No. So Alice was wondering, a question she had is how dramatically should you change a print ad campaign as you move into the digital space and as people rely more on that? How are you thinking about evolving the creative, evolving the content as the venue, the format of it changes? Jeff, do you want to start us off on that one?
Sure. I mean, I'll take a crack at this. For us, we serve, 4 primary verticals, and we're serving a particular audience. And so we don't do a lot of print, to be honest with you. It's so much easier to micro-target people digitally. So it's not that we don't do any print, but a kind of a one-to-many approach, even into a particular vertical print magazine or something. That's not a big investment for us. I'd rather put the money in digital. So we're focused more on how do we use digital to really micro-target particular personas in particular verticals. And so that's a bigger investment for us. So probably not the right person to ask.
Right. But so it all ends up being super targeted, super customized to the digital.
And as much as we can, personalized.
Interesting.
One level below that, right?
Well, in a way, digital lets you do that, which means you really should do that. You want to take advantage of the capabilities. So this whole idea of a creative idea that spans across everything a little bit goes away. Casey, how do you think about that as you've done more of the digital?
Yeah, so we're not that dissimilar. We've never really done a ton of print. We've done a little bit, and I will tell you that the little bit we've done is almost entirely gone. And so when we think about cross-channel now, it's digital. It's also new channels, right? Podcast advertising, which can also be super targeted in a different way versus a print ad. So we're also not doing a ton of that because we're so tied into the targeting and focusing solely on our total addressable market. The one thing that I've actually seen change, we used to optimize a lot for mobile, and that's all shifted back. So people are now, because they're all home and they're not commuting and they're not on their phones, they're looking at their computer all day. And so when you think about search engine marketing and some of those investments, we've had to shift our focus there quite a bit.
Isn't that interesting? But you're right, though. It's like now we're a little bit less on the phone. Commuting has sort of gone away. It just doesn't take that long to get down to the basement. And you can't do much of a podcast in there. I think that's right. How do you think about metrics in this environment? Because as the world's so different now, what do you even compare against with a metric at the moment, right? Because you can't compare against a year ago because that's like a different world. Even comparing to March seems like maybe the wrong comparison to do. So what metrics are you watching when you think about the business and how do you know if anything's working these days? Right? I don't know. Casey, you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, sure. I think that the year-over-year comparison is for sure tricky, right? Because there is none, and that doesn't exist. What we've started doing is a lot more benchmarking, quite honestly, is getting data on other people in our industry who are investing in similar things from a leading indicator perspective and focusing on, are we getting the right leading indicators? Are we at least on par or above where our competitors are? Has been one aspect of it, and where we're not, how do you dial it up or down? But the metric that we look at from a marketing perspective at West Monroe, at least, is influence on revenue, and revenue across the board is harder to come by. So as long as we're keeping up some of those percentages, we kind of declare victory, right? Especially because the biggest source of revenue was ripped away from us in events.
Right. Interesting. That's exactly right. Impact on revenue. Hey, Jeff, what are you looking at these days in terms of metrics?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One is everyone's business is different, so it all depends. For us, Q1 was kind of down a little bit. Q2 was down a lot. Q3, which we just announced earlier this week, was pretty flat, and we're back to growth in Q4. So Q2 is a giant anomaly, as was Q1 and Q3. So when I think about budgets or metrics, in a lot of ways, I'm trying to kind of reset. Now that we're back into a growth mode for our forward-looking guidance for this quarter, I am looking at a year ago. And when I look at budgets as another example, I'm kind of pretending 2020 didn't exist, and I'm just going back to 2019 a little bit and saying, hey, that's the compare, because it's just too wacky of a cycle where you have this kind of way down and then coming back, and it's not it doesn't make for good comparison.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's going to be thrown off comparisons in like every industry for the next 10 years, because it's going to be
more of your asterisks.
Throw off all the averages, all the trend lines, everything. We're going to be working through that for ever on that. So let me ask you another question. I'm curious about how do you hit the right tonality with customers right now? Right. So I did a program with folks from Target the other day. And one of the questions that came up was, how do you, for example, develop a holiday campaign right now, knowing that the holidays are so unclear and it's not certain what do you even say about the holidays that would be resonating with people? I mean, the traditional thing of like the big family all open the presents together, that probably is not happening. And even if you run that, it not only does it not connect with people, it could actually hurt you, right? Because people could say, wow, you are really out of touch. So how do you figure out a message when you, from what your customers are going through in this kind of a world?
Yeah. I guess it's my turn to go first here. So I was thinking Casey was getting all the tough questions first. Now I get this one. Okay. So first of all, we're a B2B company. So thinking about, the holiday impact is different for us. Like, for example, retail is about 40% of our business, and retail is not making any changes in the fourth quarter, right? Like, that's not the time for them to be making large tech investments. So things kind of calm down. So we don't have so much seasonal messaging, particularly around this time. I think that we're going back to what everyone is doing. The bigger trend for us, Tim, is, and what's fueling our business over the last few years is digital transformation, right? I mean, in the what we call the on-demand economy today, where, hey, it wasn't that long ago when I got a package in 2 days, it was like miraculous. Now, if that package doesn't show up, I'm angry, right? Like, the expectations are going up. Like, I expect when I do buy online pickup in store, they're going to have everything I want. They had perfect visibility of their inventory, and they can deliver to me on time. These trends are driving digitization in our customers, and they're all at different points in the maturity model. And so we're using that as kind of a structure for a lot of our messaging these days. I don't know where you are in the maturity model, whether you're in retail or you own a warehouse, or in healthcare, and where one exists, we use it. But you're always trying to move and accelerate that, and we're trying to leverage that.
So you must segment your customers pretty carefully, Jeff, about where they are in the journey, because you don't want to go to somebody who's really advanced and say like, oh, maybe you should think about digital. And likewise, you don't want to go to somebody who's just starting out and say, it's time to use AI to recalibrate your product. They're like, I don't even know where
you're exactly right. I mean, warehouse is a great example. We know a significant portion of our customers, and I'll use an example that's fun, cannabis, right? So a lot of people hey, I'm going to start a grow house, right? That's been a very popular business to start. And then you think, I'm going to just use Excel to track everything in my cannabis business. And then you realize you're in a regulated business, and you need to know everything from seed to store, but where everything went. And guess what? Now you start needing to track and trace, label, and scan all through the process, every seed to the store. And now it's like, holy smokes. So I need to go from paper to that. In other industries, they're deploying robotics, AI, machine vision, and they're moving on, right? So you have to segment that all. And by the way, it's different for warehouse than it is in healthcare. It's different in retail.
Very nice. Casey, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I can go real quick. I think this ties to something I said earlier in authenticity matters and talking human to human. I think if you don't have an authentic brand already, you cannot create one right now. People see through that, or buyers, B2C or B2B, see through that. And so to us, the two anchors are, and Jeff just hit on this a little bit, is understanding the issues that are facing our customers and talking to them only about those things, and understanding that and being true to who we are and remaining authentic. And I think that from there, you can't really go wrong. I think when you start to work your own agenda is when things fall off the rails, like the holiday idea with everybody opening presents together.
All right, Casey, thank you. On that note, we unfortunately got to bring this to a close. We're coming up at the hour. Casey and Jeff, thank you. This was so interesting. What a world we live in. It's an incredible world, but it's interesting. I think it's forcing us all to rethink how we approach planning, but it certainly does not take it away as an important thing to think about for all of us. We just need to come at it with a fresh perspective and find the upsides in all of this, because they certainly are there. All right, with that, I want to turn it back to Roland, who's gonna, I guess, got some final comments for us, but thank you. This was really fun to be part of. And
well, fantastic job, Tim. Engaging and lively. You're probably our liveliest presenter of the last year. And, I know you came from the client side. Tim was at Kraft for 11 years, and behind his right shoulder, there's a bottle of Miracle Whip. Now, Tim, I know you managed that business and you left Kraft in 2002. Yeah. So is that really an 18-year-old jar of Miracle Whip.
It turns out Miracle Whip does get better with age.
Okay, it's probably
better like as time goes by. So if this were an old one, no, I'm going to keep the old ones real safe, down in the basement or something. No,
all
this
right. Party in Tim's office later. Well, thank you, Casey and Jeff. You're two of the most smart, nimble, strategic CMOs I know, and what you did to adjust to the pandemic and looking ahead is giving your companies an opportunity. That's why you're winning in the market. And for all of you on the call, as Tim started out, this is a time of dislocation and change. Customers' needs are changing, and the companies you're leading that are addressing those changes and taking those bold moves and trying some new things in the next calendar year, you're the ones who will win. Conversely, if you don't try those things, your competitors are thinking about how they need to change. Thank you all. Again, we have two upcoming events next Wednesday at 5:30. We have the social event and recipe exchange that the Young Professional Group is sponsoring. And then in December, on December 11th from noon to 1, we have a great event featuring the Global Marketing and Brand Director for Caterpillar, Victoria Morrissey. Thank you all again, and we look forward to the next time. All the best.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.